Hi, my name's Seth Miles Randall, and I'm making this video in the hopes that I can touch people's hearts and invite people to see a contentious issue in a new light. I was born and lived in apartheid South Africa until, at the age of 12, our family moved to Eswatini, a small African kingdom between South Africa and Mozambique. Until the age of about 10 years old, the only black people I knew personally were the man who would work in our garden, the lady who came and babysit us when my parents went out, and a lady who would come and help my mother with ironing once a week. And yet by South African standards, we were considered fairly liberal in the sense that my great uncle was put under 3 years of house arrest for publishing anti-apartheid literature. And because in my home we were never taught to hate people of other cultures, and yet I was a racist, not because of the way I was raised by my family, but because I grew up within a system that systematically dehumanized black people, and in which white supremacy was a given and was hardly even challenged by most people. If you had told me at the time that I was a racist, I would have vehemently disagreed with you. I would have drawn on all the classic white disclaimers to racism, that when our schools finally did open to different races, that 2 of my 3 closest friends were Indian and African respectively, and that when we moved to Eswatini and I had the privilege of attending a United World College there, that immediately most of my friends were black. And yet I was a racist. I remember arguing vigorously with my classmates about my perceived or the perceived virtues of colonization, very insensitively to the way that colonization affected and continues to affect Africa as a continent and African people. I had another argument with my friends, which kind of haunts me to this day. We were learning about the famous Shaka Zulu, the warrior king of the Zulu nation. And I had learned about Shaka Zulu in South Africa in my white school. And because I had English or Afrikaans speaking teachers, we were taught that his name was Shaka. And so embarrassingly, I took it upon myself to correct my African friends on their pronunciation of Shaka Zulu. For anyone who knows anything about Eswatini and South Africa, the Swati people are an offshoot of the Zulu people, and Siswati and isiZulu are languages so close to one another as can be mutually understood by native speakers. And so if I had stopped to examine the logic of the situation, the logic of an anglicized white kid correcting the pronunciation of 2 Siswati first language speakers on a Zulu name, I would have stood down, but I didn't. And to me, that is really what encapsulates what white supremacy is. When we talk about white supremacy, it conjures up images of the Ku Klux Klan and people lynching black activists. And those are horrible, radical manifestations of white supremacy. But I think that the heart of supremacy of any kind is a quiet, unquestioning confidence in the superiority of our thinking and our value systems. And it consists of a stubborn adherence to our point of view that is dangerously immune to logic and facts, that a challenge to the status quo is at best ignorant or misled, misguided, and at worst morally unconscionable. And so in my mind, when I look at that situation in Eswatini, I see that one of the key tenets to racism is the appropriation of a people's narrative by another group. So in apartheid South Africa, I had been taught about Black South Africans, but I had been taught about them through the paradigm or the words and the history as recorded by white South Africans. Not only was that the predominant or accepted history or narrative about Black South Africans, but it was actually the only legally allowed view of Black South Africans. And so it was a very extreme and very pernicious example of racism. Fast forward 30 years to me living in a largely white conservative town in the United States. And while the legal environment is very different to that of apartheid South Africa, the social and cultural climate is eerily reminiscent of it for me. And give me a moment to explain what I mean by that. To the average conservative white American, the narrative being told of, for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement is one that is framed by largely white male pundits on conservative news outlets. It is a narrative of riots, of looting, of violence, destruction of property, and even the killing of innocent policemen. What is starkly absent from that narrative is, one, the voices of African Americans themselves, whose narrative it is, and secondly, any attempt to connect with the humanity or to connect with empathy to the people that they are purporting to describe. And when we look at our lives as facilitated by social media, I see that it is very easy for us to live in a state that doesn't require of us to step outside of ourselves and connect empathetically with people with whom we have differing opinions. We can quite comfortably stay in the echo chambers of of people with similar views to us, and where the social complexity of issues are reduced to cheap partisan attacks on one another and one-liners that are designed to give us a false sense of, or a confirmation of the prejudices that we already hold. For me, a pivotal point in the evolution of how I understand race to this day happened when I read the spectacular book Things Fall Apart by Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. For me, at that point, it was the first time that I read about colonization, about the tension between white and black in Africa from the point of view of a black African. And simply put, it shook my world, and it helped me to see things in a way that I had never seen them before. And so today, the challenge that I would like to give anyone who views this video is to stretch yourself by exposing yourself to the narratives of those with whom you disagree, particularly at this point in history for white Americans or white South Africans, white people around the world, to expose themselves, in America's case, to African American or whatever minority you live around, to expose yourself to the narrative of black people as told by black people themselves. I think by doing so, you will equip yourself to connect with the humanity within yourself, the humanity within others. You will develop your empathy, and it will enable you to sit in empathy with the people whose stories you have allowed to enter into your heart. Thank you so much for listening, and please forward this to someone you think would be touched by what I've said.